the varsities in a way have been affected with what appears to be a warning strike by the striking lecturers now, the Academic Staff Union of universities. And of course, they are saying as a matter of fact that the strike will go ahead until federal government actually accedes to its demand. Now they're looking at the memorandum of understanding entered into by the government since 2009 and of course 2020. Now the government is saying let's start de novo. Let's start all over again and begin renegotiation, which ASUU is saying it's a no-no until the government looks at what it has reached as an agreement earlier, then they can move ahead. And that's where the question mark is. Now joining us on the platform to look at this development is Mr. Rotimi Johnson. Of course, he's a social commentator. It's great to have you here. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
All right, looking at this development itself, ASUU federal government impasse appears to have been lingering. And of course, when the two elephant fights, the normal parlance or the usual adage is that is the grasses that suffers. And here, the students are the one bearing the brunt because now they are supposed to have resumed for academic session, but they are being out as a result of this lingering crisis itself. But let's look at the stance of the government. Why does the government, for instance, want ASUU to go back and start de novo, start afresh, to start negotiating after they had reached an agreement in 2020 and of course 2009? What exactly is your perspective on this?
Well, I'm not surprised that federal government delay tactics because you know that the present financial crisis in Nigeria, the federal government is almost insolvent. No money. That's the truth. Although
no money in the purse of the president.
There is no money.
How would the government explain that?
We're running a deficit budget already. So
are you making excuses for the government?
No. Wait, I'm still going somewhere. So okay. I'm not surprised for the delay, tactics. But you also look at it critically that this has been a lingering, it has been like a perennial crisis, not peculiar to this present administration. We've not been able to find a lasting solution to it. So, out of frustration of not knowing the way out, the federal government has, resolved to delay tactics. That's what I'm saying. But I'm not, giving excuses for the federal government. I'm only stating the facts. That's why I'm not surprised, because this present administration doesn't have what it takes to provide a lasting solution to a problem that is going to about 30 years, about 3 decades of incessant ASUU strikes. And whether we agree with that or not, the strike on its own has contributed largely to the decadence in the standard of.
Do you accurately believe that the federal government does not have money?
I believe so. Because we won't be so much in debt, and what it will take to service our debt, the current debt profile, will be like maybe half of the budget for the year.
Is this a man-made factor?
Yes, because it's largely due to mismanagement and lack of vision and focus. Because when we had the surplus, what did we do with it? And there are a lot of loopholes, a lot of leakages in financial administration of this country that have not been blocked. So it's a man-made problem. We dig this hole, this financial hole. We dug it many years ago, and we are not surprised we are here where we are now. But we can't also deny where we are. The federal government doesn't have the financial capacity to be able to resolve this present ASUU strike.
But is that not a big blow for the federal government, not being able to have the financial muscle? Now, who does the federal, who exactly is the federal government going to address in that light? Because obviously there are monies that are supposed to be voted for education under a benchmark. And now we are signatories to some of those standards, talking about international standard of quality education, quality healthcare delivery system. But here we're still grappling to get up with the benchmark, and we keep going out there to get loans. You talked about mismanagement and wastage. Who is the federal government going to explain that to? As a matter of fact, to say they do not have money for education. Can that be heard of?
Well, like I said, this present administration came into government, on a very high hope pedestal. The expectation from this administration was like hitting the rooftop. We all had the expectation that there will be financial, prudence. There will be, accountability. There will be a turnaround in the leadership dispensation towards public treasury. But we are all 7 years down the line. We've seen that it was more like a delusion grandeur for us, because this government has done entirely even worse than those we condemned earlier. So if we are where we are today, we should not be surprised, because there were no plans on ground. We can't see the vision. We can see just in October or November, we just had the presidency just appointed economic advisor, chief economic advisor, and you now look at, they just passed the budget in December. So for this last budget year, how much impact can the advice, that's if it is followed, of the economic advisor make? So we did not plan for prosperity in Nigeria. We did not plan for financial independence and prosperity. So where we are should not be surprising to anybody.
But the argument on finances is a major issue for ASUU. Like, if you look at the government officials, most of them have their children in schools abroad. And these are schools where you pay very large amount of money. And of course, they don't have their children in the public institutions, the federal institutions, the varsity system here in Nigeria. Now, how will ASUU take this hook, line, and sinker, given the fact that some of them spend a huge amount of money to send their children, not one, not two, outside the country to school, our government officials, and now the school system have been left alone, and now you have instances of we don't have enough money to cater for Nigerian varsities. Now, is that not a deception? And secondly, how do ASUU even take this in, as a matter of fact?
Well, it's not only government officials that have their children.
But in this matter, we're talking about leadership.
And even ASUU members, most ASUU members too, they have, well, let me say most, let me say some, have their children in private universities in Nigeria and even outside the country. Because once you can afford it, you have every reason to think otherwise before you send your children to public.
Do you think ASUU member will want to take their awards outside the country if the school system was better off?
That's what I'm saying, that it has collapsed to that point that, if you can afford it, you rather want to send your children to better schools where the school calendar is predictable, not with this intermittent interruption in the school calendar. And like I said earlier, whether we agree with it or not, the crisis in the institution and these incessant strikes, is two ways. We can't put all the blames on the federal government. We must also blame the ASUU. We must also, that's the truth.
For what now?
Now, one thing I hold against ASUU particularly is that ASUU, eat their cake and have it every time. It's like when they go on strike, it's like what we call isusu, contribution. It's like if they are doing monthly contribution, because whatever, for how long, they will still collect their money, they will still collect their pay. It's like a compounded salary that comes back to them. So the strike is not affecting them in any adverse way, but it affects the student irreversibly, because the years lost, the months lost cannot be recovered. And when they come back from the strike, they collapse the school calendar. And all these things have a way of also affecting the standard of education and the quality of graduates we turn out from these schools. So whether we agree with it or not, you know that these strikes too, they have a way that the ASUU, they don't, it is a two-way profit for them. They get improvements and they also get paid for the work they didn't do, you know. So either way, you look at ASUU too as a fault in it. But we are talking about the federal government, and this government, apart from lacking the ability for good negotiation, because so far you see that the Minister for Labor and Productivity and the Minister for Education, the kind of comments they make, the kind of attitude they put forth towards this industrial crisis is not very encouraging. And that's why I said they lack the capacity for good negotiation and crisis management. Because in all this, you also be willing to compromise. It's not an ego strife where you say, I will not bow down to them. No, a lot of destinies are at stake. A lot of students, I've always said it, look, when there are strikes like this, many students get involved in
but many would have actually said, as a matter of fact, that the major blame should go to the government. Now let's look at the attitude of even the government itself and its officials. You realize that Nance met recently with the Minister of Education, the Federal Minister of Education in Abuja, and of course they told him straight off that he sent his own son outside the country and recently was celebrating the fact that he just graduated, and of course that they have parents who cannot afford that, and that's why they want the university in Nigeria to be open. And the man said the only important thing he can pick out of it is that other students have not joined the strike, which he feels that more of these students, should join this protest of actually asking the lecturers to resume. He didn't really address the fact that his own child graduated outside the country, and that is the education minister of Nigeria. Now, do we blame ASUU for this? And he walked out on the students. This is a man who is supposed to respect, and of course, the oath of office that he has as the education minister, and also look at the resources going into the education sector and be able to explain to an average Nigerian to say, this is the reason why we're having it difficult to actually accede to the way ASUU has asked for all of these demands. He never explained that. He walked out on them. And now, if you have that as a man who is supposed to be serving the people, then where exactly has ASUU gone wrong? If that could happen between the students and the representative of the government, so where exactly has ASUU, what has ASUU really done wrong?
Now, I agree with you, and I said it earlier that the Labor Minister and the Minister for Education lack capacity to be able to resolve this crisis. I saw that interview. I saw his, even beyond what he said, I saw his body language. He felt slighted. He felt angry at the way the students were, addressing him. And that's why I said, if you have that kind of attitude, that kind of body language, even beyond what you say, you can always guess that you will not do your best to resolve this issue. They don't have the capacity. And if you're talking about, government officials, some of these government officials, some of these minister for education, some of them are even unpicked from the institutions. Some of them are lecturers. And we've had a situation where a former ASUU president was even made minister for education, and we still had strike. So some of these problems we have, they are intrinsic in our nature as Nigerians. Some of these elites don't really believe that education at that level should be free, and they lack the political will to drive commercializing the education. So they just leave it to run on autopilot. When there is strike, it doesn't affect them personally. Their children are outside. It's not a crime to have your children outside. But if the majority of the populace cannot afford to send their children to school, then you are breeding insecurity. you're breeding insecurity.
So would we say that Adamu has failed? And of course, looking at Chris Ngige too, in a way, if you look at the choice of words he's been using, and of course, I also even believe that at the time they went on this warning strike, he was not in the country. He was out there. And only for him to return and say, oh, they've just gone on leave. It's just their usual thing, and they want to collect money at the end of the day. And I also feel that they were being, it's like spiting them to say that, because this has been back and forth. We've been negotiating, we've been demanding that they should revitalize the educational sector, especially the varsity now in Nigeria, and of course look at their welfare. Now, if you look at all of that, would we say that Chris Ngige and of course Adamu has failed in this regard, and they need to step aside?
Of course, they have failed. That's why I said they lack capacity to be able to resolve this crisis. Their comments, not even for this.
Shouldn't they even think about stepping aside?
But how many people in Nigeria are stepped aside for lack of, productivity or capacity?
Shouldn't there be a deterrence then?
You must trace it back to their employer, to the person that hired them. What is the body language of their principal towards the crisis? What's the body language? Does he have a holistic idea of all that is happening? Yes, you might see it on the page on the headlines, news headlines, but is he aware of why ASUU is on strike, what they are demanding for, and what it takes to resolve the strike? Because if you give them marching order, and these ministers know that their job might be dependent on successful resolution of this crisis, they will sit up and their comments will change. But as long as their principal is lackadaisical about it, they too will also pass it down to all the negotiators and the stakeholders in the negotiation. So that's it. If the Mr. President wakes up now and say, look, whatever it takes, I want you to resolve ASUU strike, the man will become sleepless. He will begin to think outside the box. But if there is no direct, marshalling order, he will just relax, still enjoy his sleep, enjoy his vacation, and still do a business as usual. And that's why he called it that they are on strike, they are on leave. That is the usual thing. That's a very responsible statement from a minister concerning the strike of the.
All right, let me just have you hold your word, Mr. Johnson, just to let our viewers know out there that you can also participate. The numbers will be right on your screen, but do remember that you have to turn down the audio level of your TV set, or you move away from it. Your name and the location where you're calling from too, while you are at it this morning. Now, we've actually looked at some of the excesses of both ASUU and the federal government. Now, it's going to be very difficult for one to say ASUU has excesses here, because if you look at the body language of the government, it has not been encouraging, given the fact that they are supposed to ensure, as a matter of fact, there should be delivery of education in Nigeria, and that's why they were being voted in to revamp the educational sector. But where are we today? We're still grappling with dilapidated structures and laboratories in higher institutions here in Nigeria. You realize that in some schools outside these shores of this country, people who study courses that are supposed to be put into practicals, do that outside the country in such a way that it's beyond theoretical. Now we're still grappling together, and that's some of the things ASUU is saying. Now, if you say that there are little excesses with ASUU, now what can the government do differently? Can they pull out their children from the schools they have outside the country because they pay so much, and put that monies that they are using to pay for their children's school fees and put it into our own educational sector here, and allow their children to go to federal universities like every other children here in Nigeria? Won't our educational system improve better than what we have today?
Well, it's not a guarantee. And that approach is not practicable, because the fund with which government officials are sending their wards and children to schools abroad, they are not directly from government's coffer. So if it were to be directly from government's coffer, we can say there should be a stop to that. but because they are not directly from the government.
How do we know that?
Well, because you don't even have a fact to.
Can we monitor that?
You can't.
So
that's why I said
that is speculative.
You can't insist.
It's even speculative to say it's not from government.
Yes, you can't insist on that, because there are no ways to prove that he's using government money to sponsor his wives and children to schools abroad.
But the fact that he's sitting on that seat, in spite of the fact that he's sitting on that seat,
I just want us to be more realistic. I'm not a government official. I just want us to be more realistic and be more Nigerian if you're thinking of finding lasting solution to some of these problems. If somebody is given appointments as Minister for Education or Minister for Health, for instance, you can't say that he should not send. Because particularly, I don't like this Minister for Education because of the way he addressed the students and the body language of that interview. But at the same time, I felt if his word graduated recently, that means that child has even been in the institution overseas before he became Minister for Education. You understand? So, to a large extent, how can we enforce it? Because even that child
he's almost spending 8 years in office. That's the education minister. And now in schools abroad, 3 years, you're done.
I'm just
not like in Nigeria. So obviously you might be there on the child too. Got enrollment.
One of the things I think we should focus more on is the things we have influence over that are within our power to control. For instance, the kind of people we vote into power. Those are the things we have influence over. Then the kind our recruitment as populace. Yes, we can complain. For instance, if there are no strike, nobody will complain about the attitude of the Minister for Education and such comments. And I think even the media and the social organizations, NGOs, and all these organizations, you even pick on it, because out of the abundance of the heart,
the mind speaks.
And if you begin to address people like that, even before the camera, then we can imagine what you will say to your immediate colleagues, and even at the national executive meeting, if you are asked to update the meeting on why we have ASUU strike. Those are the things I'm talking about. We, as populace, yet we don't have influence over if a government official should send their words to study abroad or not, because some of these children have even been living abroad before some of these people became ministers. You understand? But what is important is, how can we find a lasting solution to incessant ASUU strike? It's beyond what the 1999 agreement.
So how can we actually get the ailing institution, the dilapidated infrastructures in these universities right, if we keep having them maintain their kids abroad? Because now many people have been thinking that if there is a law that says once you are assuming an office, especially critical office, and of course you're benefiting in a foreign way, withdraw all the foreign benefits and put it indigenously. That could work. That's what some proponents actually came up with. And now, as an education minister, is it head off for him to have a son, for instance, anyone graduated outside the shores of the country while he's seated as the minister of education,
and while the schools are on strike
and shuts down?
Now, I'm not against that. I'm only looking at the workability of it. And that's why I said we will only be belaboring ourselves. Now, we're going to another electioneering, dispensation. Let's be more critical of whoever we're going to vote for. Already we have seen that there is no matter of agitation or protestation that can make this present leadership of the country to fire any of the appointed heads. Because in a situation where the voice of the people carry much weight, you can say, okay, we want a minister before you appoint. one of the things we are particular about the minister is that he must not have a child studying or any word studying abroad under his scholarship. No, that we want anyone that has, and if we say that, then we must also include the fact that lecturers too must keep their children within the university.
Won't that happen naturally if the schools are better?
It won't, because
if the schools are better, why would you want to pay so much outside?
Agitating for cannot happen overnight. If you're talking about revamping the education system, you're talking about raising, rebuilding the standard. It will take a while. It will take a while. It will take a while. So all these things, and we have to go through this process. It is holistic. That's
so how did Awolowo? How did now Awolowo is being celebrated, and of course a number of our political leadership have so much to say about him, but unfortunately it's been believed that not any of his legacies presently are being observed in the country. Let's take this caller and we'll look at that question. Hello, good morning. Good morning, please. The audio level of your TV is loud. That's why we're having that crackling sound. Hello, good morning.
Hello?
Yes, please. What's the name and where are you calling us from? Alright, we hope that once you call in before we actually round up the program, that you turn down the audio level of your TV set and let us hear what you have to say. Tell us your location and your name. Alright, looking at that aspect that I actually looked at in terms of this kind of development that we have seen being stopped in such a way. Now, how do we move out of what appears to be a stagnant situation and move on and have a better educational system in the country itself?
Well, one of the things we must also look at, because I kept talking about addressing the incessant strikes, is not just this particular one. Because if you look at it critically, once federal government meets the demand of ASUU, maximum of 5 weeks, you will hear that SANU, senior staff, will go on strike. That they are operating in the same system with ASUU. So why the disparity in the salaries and allowances? Then you hear that NASU too will go on strike. And when all these unions go on strike, they try to frustrate the university system so that they will feel the impact of their absence. You understand? That's why I said it's just beyond what they are negotiating now. We need to find a lasting solution. And as soon as federal government meet ASUU, then you hear ASUU too. And other research institutions. We have leadership problem in Nigeria. And we must be able to resolve all these strikes in all the institutions. That's why I said it's not just about ASUU. This is a crisis that has lingered for about 30 years. It's just unfortunate that the kind of irresponsible attitude towards this present strike by the Minister for Education and Labor, is disheartening. But it's a perennial problem that needs a holistic approach and drastic solution. So that once federal government resolve this, which is possible, that you hear in another 5 weeks, 6 weeks, NASU is going on strike, SAMU is going on strike, ASUU is going on strike.
Meaning nothing is working in the educational sector.
You understand? So we need to sit down and resolve all this once and for all. We must have educational plan, educational vision. Okay, the next 10 years, we have resolved all these issues. So it is an aberration for any academic union to go on strike. Because this is what the federal government will do. If you go on strike, there is no payment for any time you done tour. You understand? That's when you're talking, and the people too will back it.
That actually slipped off my mind. I was actually looking at AWO and how much more they talked about AWO in the light of the fact that it's celebrating 113th posthumous birthday. Now, many of this political leadership, because they said we have a political crisis, political leadership crisis, they've all come out to begin to extol the virtues of this late man. Now, how many of them have replicated what he has done during his time, like free education? Now, why is it so difficult? Like some of the things that the likes of ASUU did and Nnamdi Azikiwe is what we are still living on at present. So does it mean that we don't have monies over the years to develop these things beyond what they left behind?
It's a misplaced priority. It's a misplaced priority. You know, some of those people that are claiming to be Hawoists now, many of them are even objecting to free education. Many of them benefited from free education within Nigeria and government scholarship to even study abroad. Many of them. But look at now. Many of them will, even in your state that is doing everything possible to practice free education, you see them coming out shamelessly to condemn the free education. And I tell people that as soon as we take free education out of our system, then you need to spend so much on security. Because once these words from primary and secondary school, once they leave the school system, they take to vices, they take to violence, they take to street gangsterism. And those that you have sent abroad to go and study in Ivory Tower, they will come back and face the menace of those that the government refused to train. Like in Yoruba land, Omotato, Loma Ko Ileta Kota. You know, for instance, during the ASUU strike, they were hijacked by the hoodlums. And there was a point they were even threatening to burn down UCH. You know that these ones have no value at all. At all. Burning down police stations because they were excited at the lawlessness. And that is the level we have gotten to. So if we don't spend so much on education, and we have large out of school youths, then there will be serious crisis. I will give you a scenario. During the campaign in 2019, I was in the governorship convoy, and it was on a Thursday around 11 a.m. in 2019 in Ibadan, southeast. If you see the large number of children between age 9 and 15, they were running after the convoy. I was scared because some of these children were even, openly smoking hemp. They were not in school. They were not even in school uniform. They were not even in school uniform. A 9-year-old smoking hemp around 11 a.m. openly. And if you look at it like that, if we don't have a holistic plan to keep these children in school and give them qualitative education, then we are only building an army of thugs, army of robbers that will keep even the few that have paid through their nose to go to school. They will keep giving them nightmare.
All right, because our time is fast spent, and there is the common parlance that if you say education is expensive, then try ignorance. In the aspect of the fact that the government is saying what ASUU is demanding is expensive, what word for the federal government and this ASUU?
The federal government must do everything possible to meet ASUU demand. But beyond just the financial implication, they need to sit down with all these academic institutions and find a lasting solution to these crises in all our institutions, even the research institutions too, so that we can have good, academic calendar, we have good infrastructure, and we have good curriculum to follow.
All right, on that note, we must say a big thank you to Mr. Rotimi Johnson for his time on the program this morning. Of course, he is a public affairs analyst, and of course, that's the much we can take this morning on AM Cafe. Do join us again tomorrow for another interesting edition. My name is Bolabo Famous Gold. Bye for now.